In the world of royalty, every gem carries its own tale, and some tales are too priceless to part with. Rumors began circulating that Camilla was planning to sell one of Princess Diana's most cherished treasures, the iconic Spencer tiara, sending shockwaves through the royal family. This wasn't just a dazzling piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of love, legacy, and a woman whose memory continues to touch hearts around the globe. What followed was an emotional confrontation that left Princess Anne in tears, shaking the very core of the monarchy. Behind closed doors, loyalty is pushed to its limits, and emotions that have long been buried begin to surface. Drop a comment with the number 1 and follow us to discover the shocking truth behind the attempt to sell the tiara, the deepening rift within the family, and the crucial decision that altered everything. Be sure to subscribe for more royal secrets you won't hear anywhere else. The spark had been ignited. What began as an ordinary week in the royal calendar quickly turned into something far more explosive. Public events continued without disruption. The palace press office issued its usual polished statements, and the royal family appeared perfectly in sync beneath the pale winter sun. But behind the palace's towering walls, hushed conversations began to ripple through the halls. These weren't the typical murmurs about wardrobe choices or the daily ceremonial routines that usually filled the staff's chatter. The whispers carried a weightier undertone filled with a quiet tension that hinted at the reopening of old wounds that had never fully closed. The first sign came from a seasoned palace staff member whose unwavering loyalty to the royal family had never been in question. In a confidential conversation with a trusted confidant, they disclosed that a famous jeweler in London had been approached to assess a particularly unique piece of jewelry. But this wasn't just any ornament. It was the Spencer tiara, the diamond-studded crown Princess Diana wore on her wedding day, a piece forever linked to her public persona, embodying her elegance and enduring spirit. The jeweler, aware of the intricate craftsmanship and the immense historical weight the tiara carried, hesitated. He refused to proceed with the appraisal without further confirmation, understanding the gravity of the situation and the delicate emotions attached to this iconic artifact. This decision, made to safeguard the tiara's integrity and legacy, couldn't keep the matter contained for long. Whispers began circulating among those who recognized its immense value, not just in monetary terms, but in the deep emotional and historical weight it carried. It wasn't merely the prospect of the tiara being transferred that sparked unease. It was the disturbing notion that someone within the royal family was contemplating the sale of such a cherished heirloom that truly unsettled those who knew its importance. For Prince William and Prince Harry, the Spencer tiara was far more than just an heirloom. It was a living connection to their mother's most cherished moments. The image of Diana wearing the tiara is forever imprinted in the nation's collective memory. From the unforgettable sight of her walking down the aisle at St. Paul's Cathedral to the elegance she exuded at national banquets, the tiara was an ever-present symbol of her warmth, courage, and the undeniable magic she brought to her role. Within the family, the tiara carried profound layered meaning. It was a constant reminder of the vows made to honor Diana's legacy and protect the symbols that marked her place in history. To sell it wasn't just a financial decision, it would be a betrayal of the very essence of who Diana was. It would send a message, whether deliberate or not, that even the most sacred pieces of the past could be sold for the right price. The whispers grew in intensity, seeping out from the servants' quarters and the jeweler's private office. Soon they reached Princess Anne, who had stood by Diana's side through both the public demands of royalty and the private struggles that defined her life. The news struck her deeply stirring memories of the bond she shared with her late sister-in-law. Anne was never one to wear her emotions on her sleeve, but she understood the profound significance certain heirlooms carried. She knew how the public would perceive such a move, and more importantly, how it would deeply affect her two nephews, who still held their mother's memory like a precious photograph guarded closely within their hearts. As the silence of that week stretched on, the tension grew, and the stage was quietly set for a confrontation that would change everything. What began as a simple request for an appraisal had ignited one of the most emotional confrontations in modern royal history. The untold story of the Spencer tiara reveals a legacy far older than its association with Princess Diana. Long before it became known as her wedding tiara, the Spencer tiara had its own rich history. Unlike many royal jewels, it was not crafted in the royal workshops for the House of Windsor. Instead, it was a family heirloom steeped in the traditions and history of the Spencer family, carrying a legacy that transcended the royal walls. Instead, it was sourced from the private treasure trove of the Spencer family, one of England's most distinguished aristocratic lineages. The earliest components of the tiara can be traced back to the 18th century, although its present design was finalized in the 1930s. Crafted from a blend of inherited gems and newly purchased diamonds, each curve and floral motif was meticulously chosen to embody the elegance and legacy of the Spencer family. It was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a visual representation of their heritage, steeped in centuries of history and tradition. For generations, the tiara was a cherished tradition passed down with immense reverence from one Spencer bride to the next. Each time it was worn, it marked not only the union of two lives, but the continuation of a family legacy that stretched across centuries. By the time Lady Diana Spencer came of age, the tiara had already been worn by her sisters Lady Sarah and Lady Jane on their wedding days. It had become more than just an accessory. It was a living testament to the Spencer family's rich history and the bonds that tied each new bride to her ancestors. The tradition was so ingrained that when Diana's wedding was announced, it was unquestioned she would wear the tiara. On the morning of July 29, 1981, it was carefully removed from its velvet-lined box and placed upon Diana's head. The iconic photographs from that day capture the tiara's diamonds shimmering in the light as Diana made her way down the long aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral, gleaming with a brilliance that seemed to acknowledge its role in a moment destined for the history books. The tiara rested gracefully atop the folds of her vast ivory silk gown, a flawless fusion of heritage and hope. It blended centuries-old tradition with the fresh promise of a new chapter in royal history. For the millions watching around the world, it symbolized the pinnacle of a fairy tale they longed to believe in, a moment that seemed to make the impossible seem real. Yet beyond the glamour and public ceremony, the tiara held a deeper, more personal significance for Diana. In private conversations, she often mentioned that it was a bit heavy and sometimes gave her a headache, but she still cherished it. Unlike many of the jewels she wore as Princess of Wales, this was not a borrowed piece from the royal family. It was hers in a way few possessions could claim, to be a precious gift from her own bloodline, a tangible link to her heritage and the family that had come before her. In the complex and often isolating world Diana entered after her wedding, the tiara served as a tangible connection to her roots, a quiet reminder of the young woman she had been before the palace doors closed behind her. After Diana's tragic death in 1997, the tiara was returned to the Spencer family rather than becoming part of the official royal collection. It was a final gesture of respect, ensuring that the piece remained within the family that had passed it down through the generations, preserving its deep personal and historical significance. The tiara was occasionally displayed in charity exhibitions, but it was never worn publicly by another member of the royal family. For Prince William and Prince Harry, seeing the tiara once again was like encountering a fragment of their mother's spirit forever preserved in silver and diamonds. To the wider public, the Spencer tiara became one of the most iconic and instantly recognizable pieces of jewelry in modern royal history, a symbol of Diana's grace legacy and enduring impact on the world. Its value went far beyond the material. The tiara became a crown of memories, a silent witness to both joy and sorrow, and a symbol of a young woman's journey from innocence to becoming a part of history. It was this rich, layered story that made the very idea of selling it so unfathomable. The shocking revelation came one day while Princess Anne was at Gatcombe Park when the call arrived, a call that would shake the very foundations of the royal family and stir emotions that had long been buried. It was a quiet day at Gatcombe Park with her schedule light and only a brief meeting in the afternoon with an equestrian charity on the agenda. Princess Anne sat in her office sifting through correspondence when her private phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, but it carried a weight that could not be ignored, one that would change the course of the day and perhaps the family's future. It was a jeweler in London whom Princess Anne had known for many years, a man trusted by the royal family for his discretion and expertise. He spoke slowly, carefully, selecting his words. A request had come to his office, he explained, asking for the appraisal of an important tiara. At first, it appeared to be just another routine task, but as soon as he saw the description and the photographs that had been sent, he instantly recognized it. It was the Spencer tiara, unmistakable with its intricate floral design and brilliant diamonds. The request, however, did not come from the Spencer family, and the circumstances surrounding it, according to the jeweler, were deeply troubling. Anne leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowing with concern. She asked him to repeat the details, her voice now sharper, though still low and measured. The jeweler confirmed that he had refused to proceed with the appraisal, insisting that confirmation from the rightful owners was needed. This decision, he explained, had not been well received by the intermediary who had contacted him, only deepening his suspicions. For a moment, Anne remained silent. The thought that the tiara, something so deeply personal and tied to her family's history, was being treated like a mere commodity for sale, made her heart ache with a sharp pang. She remembered Diana on her wedding day, radiant under the gleam of the tiara's diamonds, and the years that followed when the tiara became as synonymous with her image as her smile. To sell it wasn't just a financial transaction. It would be a rupture of a deeply personal history. Anne's sense of betrayal was overwhelming, layered with complexity. If the whispers were true, someone within the royal circle, or perhaps the extended family, had given their approval. The thought that such a sacred symbol of Diana's legacy could be treated as a mere asset to be sold felt like an unforgivable breach. The Spencer family never acted without consulting one another, leaving very few other possibilities. The implications of this were deeply troubling. The thought that such a cherished item, so intrinsically tied to Diana's legacy, could be treated as nothing more than an asset to be sold, made Anne's jaw tighten with frustration. She thanked the jeweler for his integrity, her voice steady but cold, before telling him that she would take it from there. As she hung up the phone, the silence in the room felt heavier than ever. There were established protocols for handling valuable heirlooms, but this situation was different. This was personal. Anne understood that any action she took would send ripples through the family, creating tensions that could not easily be undone. Yet she also knew that remaining silent could be seen as complicity. The weight of the decision loomed over her, and she knew she had to act for Diana, for the legacy, and for the truth. Anne sat in stillness for a few minutes, her gaze fixed on the frosted fields beyond the estate. The winter light was slowly fading, giving way to dusk, but her mind was sharper than ever. If someone was truly trying to sell the Spencer tiara, she was determined to uncover who it was, and she would stop them at all costs. What she couldn't yet know was just how deeply this discovery would shatter the fragile balance within the royal family. The confrontation behind closed doors would soon begin. The winter sun had just begun to break through the clouds when Princess Anne arrived at Clarence's house. Her car moved quietly into the courtyard. With no fanfare, a purposeful arrival meant to attract no attention. A palace staff member greeted her quietly and guided her through a side entrance down a corridor adorned with portraits of past monarchs. The air was calm, carrying the subtle scent of polished wood and fresh flowers, a fragrance that seemed to echo the house's long history. She was led into a small sitting room rarely used for official guests. The curtains were drawn halfway, softening the pale daylight, while a steady fire crackled in the hearth, adding warmth to the room's timeless tranquility. The atmosphere was warm, yet thick with tension, the kind of room crafted for private conversations. Moments later, Camilla entered holding a cup of tea, as though she had been interrupted mid-routine. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp, exuding a quiet confidence that concealed the calculation beneath. She moved with practiced ease, as though fully aware of the weight of the moment, though her demeanor betrayed nothing of the tension hanging in the air. Anne rose from her chair, nodding curtly. There were no pleasantries, no attempts at small talk. She began with the call from the jeweler, her voice steady but cold, each word carefully measured. Camilla listened intently, her eyes never leaving Anne, occasionally lifting the teacup to her lips. When Anne finished, the silence that followed felt like an eternity. The only sound in the room was the steady crackling of the fire, as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable response. Camilla set the teacup down on the table with deliberate care. Her voice was calm and composed as she explained that it had all been a misunderstanding. The tiara, she insisted, had not been put up for sale. It was simply being appraised for insurance purposes. Her words were measured, carefully chosen, as if they had been rehearsed. She stressed that protecting and preserving the Spencer tiara had always been a top priority, her tone carrying the weight of a well-practiced defense. Anne's gaze remained unwavering, her expression firm. She reminded Camilla that the tiara was far more than a mere piece of jewelry. It was a living symbol bearing the weight of Diana's legacy and the deep emotions of her two sons. Her voice was low but resolute as she spoke of the unspoken promises to protect that legacy, to preserve not just the physical gem, but everything it represented to the family and to the public. It wasn't just about the value of the tiara, Anne emphasized, but about honoring Diana's memory and ensuring it remained untouched by anything that might tarnish it. Anne's voice remained steady, but each word landed with the precision of an arrow aimed true. Camilla shifted slightly in her chair, her arms folded neatly across her lap, her calm demeanor unwavering. She repeated that the situation had been blown out of proportion, insisting there was no malice or intent to conceal anything. Yet for just a fleeting moment, a flicker of unease passed across her face. A subtle tension tugged at her expression, as though the conversation had edged just too close to a truth she wasn't ready to confront. Anne leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving Camilla's. She acknowledged the explanation, but made it clear that any future actions involving the tiara would be closely watched. The tension in the room wasn't in raised voices, but in the unspoken truths, in the unwavering gazes locked between them. It was a battle of wills, where both women understood that neither would back down, and the silence between them held the weight of unspoken promises and quiet resolve. After a polite yet frosty farewell, Anne stepped into the hallway, the air still thick with the tension of the meeting. Though brief, the conversation weighed heavily on her, its implications lingering like a heavy cloak. In the royal world, confrontations seldom end with words spoken in a room. They shift and take root elsewhere, manifesting in subtle ways in quiet actions and unspoken truths. The drive back to Gatcombe Park was long and silent, the miles stretching between them as the silence between Anne and her thoughts deepened with each passing moment. The hum of the engine was the only sound that filled the car, a constant presence in the otherwise heavy silence. Princess Anne kept her eyes on the road, but her thoughts were far from the peaceful, rolling countryside outside. The conversation at Clarence's house played over and over in her mind, Camilla's carefully chosen words clashing with the memories Anne had buried for so long. She had gone there determined to stay composed, to address the matter with the poise that was expected of her. But something in Camilla's tone and the thought of the Spencer tiara being treated as just another item to be sold had struck a raw nerve that Anne couldn't quiet. As she turned onto the familiar gravel road of the estate, the winter air seemed to grow colder, biting through the silence in a way that matched the turmoil brewing within her. Anne walked into her private office, gently closing the door behind her. The room, filled with shelves of books and scattered family photographs, had always been her sanctuary. Among the well-worn history books on one shelf, there was a framed photograph of Diana on her wedding day. The Spencer tiara sparkled in the light, almost as if alive under the grand church's glow. Anne picked up the frame and sat down at her desk, her fingers lightly tracing the glass. She could vividly recall that day standing just behind the scenes as Diana prepared to walk down the aisle. There had been a nervous smile, a light-hearted comment about the weight of the tiara, and for just a moment, Diana had gripped her hand tightly as if drawing strength from her in that pivotal moment. Anne had silently made a promise to herself that day, without saying a word, to protect the young woman about to step into a life that was both dazzling and cruel. Years later, after Diana's sudden death, that promise had evolved. It was no longer about protecting her in life, but about preserving her memory. The tiara, though it belonged to the Spencer family, had transformed into something far beyond a mere heirloom. It had become a part of Diana's spirit, a symbol of her grace, and a tangible link to the moments when she was truly herself. The thought of it being reduced to a mere asset on a valuation table stripped of its history and significance felt like a betrayal of that vow. Anne set the frame back down, but her hand lingered for a moment as if unwilling to let go of the connection to Diana that it held. The image in the frame blurred as Anne's eyes filled with tears, the face of Diana blending with the warm glow of the firelight. One tear rolled down her cheek before she could stop it. Such emotions were rare for her, reserved mostly for moments of personal reflection away from the public eye. But this was different. This wasn't about royal protocol or public image. This was about loyalty, about the silent bonds that ran deeper than the crown and the titles they wore. It was a promise made long ago, one she could never forget, and one she would defend with everything she had. She quickly wiped away the tear, but the heaviness in her chest lingered. Something in the way she viewed Camilla had shifted irreparably. The public politeness would remain, but the silent trust between them had cracked. Anne leaned back in her chair, taking a long, steady breath. Whatever came next, she was resolute she would not allow Diana's memory to be treated carelessly. The door to her emotions had opened, and there was no turning back. Camilla's justifications no longer carried any weight. The promise to protect Diana's legacy was now a matter of fierce personal duty. In the days that followed, Camilla's version of events began to take shape through carefully orchestrated conversations with select members of the press and discreet briefings with palace-friendly journalists. She insisted that the entire matter had been a misunderstanding, stressing that the Spencer tiara was never meant to be sold. The request made to the jeweler, she explained, was merely a routine part of the insurance process, a standard appraisal to ensure the piece was properly documented and protected for the future. Her tone in these private explanations was firm yet carefully measured as she worked to shape the narrative in her favor. She emphasized that, like any valuable item, periodic appraisals were essential to maintain accurate records for security and insurance purposes. That she implied was simply a routine procedural matter that had been misunderstood by those too eager to believe the worst. However, as the story quietly circulated within royal circles and began to spill over into the public realm, cracks began to form in her carefully crafted narrative. Whispers of doubt grew louder, and inconsistencies in her explanations started to surface, leaving many questioning whether there was more to the situation than Camilla was letting on. The jeweler's account of the timeline didn't quite match Camilla's explanation. He claimed that the request had been made in a manner more appropriate for items being prepared for sale rather than for a routine insurance appraisal. The absence of direct communication with the Spencer family, the rightful owners and custodians of the tiara, only deepened the confusion. Questions began to arise that no one could answer clearly, and the more the story circulated, the more it seemed that something didn't add up. Insiders began to whisper that the request had been made through an intermediary, adding yet another layer of separation between Camilla and the jeweler. While this could be seen as an effort to maintain privacy, it also fueled speculation. If the intention had truly been just a harmless appraisal, why the deliberate detachment and secrecy? Public skepticism started to grow quietly but steadily. Diana's memory remained alive in the hearts of millions around the world, and any perceived slight to her legacy was quickly met with backlash. The more the story unfolded, the clearer it became that there were more questions than answers, and the public was not willing to let the matter rest. The thought that Diana's wedding tiara could be reduced to a mere number on an appraisal sheet, no matter the reasons given, left an unsettling feeling for many. The fact that the story had been leaked to the public not through an official statement, but through calculated whispers, only added to the unease. It felt as if the tiara, so deeply tied to Diana's legacy, was being treated with a lack of respect. Meanwhile, Camilla continued to maintain her calm, public demeanor, steadfastly presenting her version of the story. But behind the polished exterior, the cracks in her narrative were becoming harder to ignore. She attended events flashing her smile for the cameras, carefully avoiding any direct mention of the controversy. Yet those who watched closely began to notice subtle changes, a slight tension in her jaw, shorter responses to certain journalists, and an increasing tendency to redirect the conversation. These small, almost imperceptible shifts hinted at the mounting pressure beneath her composed exterior, revealing that the weight of the situation was beginning to take its toll. But the whispers didn't fade as quickly as Camilla had hoped. Every time the story of the jeweler's refusal was retold, every mention of the conflicting timeline, it chipped away at the neatness of her explanation. In the royal world, perception often carries as much weight as the truth itself, and in this case the perception was slipping further out of her control. The justification had been offered, but it did little to silence the growing questions. With each passing day, the doubts only seemed to deepen, making the situation harder to contain. Instead, it left a lingering sense that somewhere behind the official explanation, the full story was still waiting to be revealed. The public's backlash came swiftly. It all began with a sensational headline in the morning papers, bold and unforgiving, leaving little room for nuance. Within hours, the story had shifted from the gossip columns to the mainstream news outlets, spreading like wildfire. The royal family, usually adept at controlling the narrative, found themselves caught in a storm they couldn't easily weather. Each newspaper added its own layer of intrigue. Some reported the incident as fact, while others presented it as a mere rumor, but the effect was the same. The British public was suddenly swept up in the question of whether the most famous tiara of Princess Diana had really come close to leaving the family. Television programs dedicated entire segments to the controversy, replaying archival footage of Diana on her wedding day. Her radiant smile framed by the Spencer tiara, alongside images of the iconic piece being showcased at charity events. The story became impossible to ignore, with the tiara now at the center of a media frenzy that cast a shadow over the royal family. Commentators passionately debated the issue, their voices tinged with both emotion and skepticism. Was it truly a harmless insurance appraisal, as Camilla claimed, or was there a quiet attempt to transfer the iconic tiara into private hands? The public's reaction was swift and emotional. For many, Diana was not just a royal figure, but a symbol of compassion, vulnerability, and strength. The thought of her legacy being sold or diminished struck a deep chord, sparking outrage among those who still held her memory close to their hearts. The tiara was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a visual reminder of the day Diana stepped into the global spotlight, a moment etched into the collective memory of millions. The thought of it leaving the family stirred deep feelings of betrayal. Online platforms quickly erupted with reactions. Hashtags began to spread within hours, with the most prominent being to keep Diana's tiara in the family. The movement gained momentum as people from all walks of life rallied to protect not just the tiara, but the enduring legacy of the woman they still held dear. Thousands of users shared iconic photos of Diana wearing the tiara, paired with heartfelt messages about legacy, respect, and remembrance. Petition drives quickly appeared on digital campaign pages, gathering signatures from across the globe at a record pace. Some called for an official statement from the palace, demanding clarity on the matter, while others pushed for a formal commitment that the tiara would remain within the Spencer family, or the royal family, forever. The movement became a powerful demonstration of public sentiment, and it was clear that the tiara had come to symbolize something much greater than just a piece of jewelry. It was a piece of history and a symbol of Diana's enduring presence in the hearts of millions. On the streets, the topic surfaced in conversations at bus stops, coffee shops, and break rooms. Even those who didn't closely follow royal affairs found themselves drawn into the emotional weight of the situation. It wasn't about diamonds or financial value. It was about legacy and the respect for a figure who had redefined what it meant to be a princess for so many. Diana had become a symbol of compassion, grace, and resilience, and the thought of her most iconic symbol being sold or lost struck a chord with people from all walks of life. The conversation wasn't just about the tiara, it was about preserving a memory and honoring a woman whose influence still resonated deeply. Palace aides quickly sprang into action, working to control the narrative by issuing carefully worded responses that neither confirmed nor denied the reports. However, the cautious tone only fueled further public speculation. The absence of a clear denial allowed the story to linger in the headlines, growing more persistent with each passing day. The uncertainty surrounding the situation kept the public's attention locked in, and what was initially a brief controversy began to take on a life of its own, dominating the media far longer than anyone at the palace had anticipated. By the end of the week, the backlash had become impossible to ignore. The Spencer tiara was no longer just an heirloom. It had transformed into a focal point for public emotion, a symbol too deeply woven into the national consciousness to be handled lightly. It became clear that some symbols, no matter their value, are untouchable without stirring profound consequences. As calls for transparency grew louder, the pressure on the palace to act decisively mounted. The Queen's silent intervention was inevitable. The controversy had escalated to a point where it could no longer be overlooked. Within the palace, the tension between Princess Anne and Camilla became an unspoken truth, expressed through fleeting glances and the quiet, deliberate precision in scheduling to ensure they remained apart. Those who worked most closely with the senior royal family members understood the underlying tension without needing to ask questions. At this critical juncture, Queen Elizabeth, with her signature calmness and impeccable sense of timing, recognized that intervention was necessary before the situation spiraled further out of control. The Queen called a private meeting at Buckingham Palace. Only a handful of assistants were aware of it, and even fewer understood its true purpose. It was clear that the time for silence had passed, and the matter needed to be addressed with the quiet authority that only the Queen could wield. Anne was called in first, arriving with the efficient swiftness she always carried in any royal task. She wasted no time on formalities, her focus sharp and unwavering. Sitting across from her mother, she spoke plainly, outlining the jeweler's account, her direct conversation with Camilla, and the mounting public unease. Her words were measured but firm, revealing the growing tension within the family and the media storm that had yet to subside. The Queen listened intently, her expression unreadable, but Anne could sense the weight of her mother's thoughts as the matter unfolded before her. Camilla repeated her stance, emphasizing once again that the issue was related to insurance, not an intention to sell. However, when faced with the Queen's directive, she accepted it without protest. Whether her compliance stemmed from genuine agreement or the understanding that this was a final decision rather than a mere suggestion, only Camilla could truly know. But one thing was certain: the decision was crystal clear, and there would be no further debate on the matter. The tiara would remain under the care of the Spencer family, and it would not be moved, appraised, or handled in any way without the clear mutual consent of both the Spencer family and the senior members of the royal family. Behind closed doors, the Queen also addressed the growing rift between Anne and Camilla. She spoke privately with each of them, gently reminding them of the necessity for unity in their public lives. The royal family's image, she emphasized, was built on cooperation and respect, and it was crucial that any differences be set aside for the good of the monarchy. Disagreements within the family, the Queen warned, should never be allowed to overshadow the royal family's role in the eyes of the public. Her words were calm and deliberate, yet carried the weight of decades spent preserving the institution through far greater storms. There was no room for division in the public eye, she reminded them. Unity was paramount. Within a week, a brief statement was released through official palace channels carefully crafted to address the issue. It confirmed that the Spencer tiara would remain under the care of the Spencer family and was to be handled with the utmost respect and caution moving forward. The matter, it seemed, was now closed. The statement confirmed the tiara's position within the care of the Spencer family and reassured the public that it would be preserved for future generations. Though the message avoided directly addressing the controversy, it succeeded in easing the fears of those concerned about the worst-case scenario. For Queen Elizabeth, the matter was now closed. However, she understood that while some rifts within the family could be managed, they would never truly heal. The silence between certain family members would remain as the weight of unspoken truths lingered just below the surface. The tiara was safe, but the fragile trust within the family would prove far more difficult to preserve. The legacy was secured, but the trust had been irrevocably broken. In the weeks following the Queen's intervention, the Spencer tiara was moved with the utmost discretion. It was placed in a royal safe, a location known only to a select few whose loyalty could not be questioned. Though its physical safety was ensured, the emotional weight of the tiara's legacy and the rift it had caused remained a quiet, lingering tension within the royal family. The Spencer family was reassured that the tiara would not be tampered with, that it would be protected under the strictest security, and that it would only be made available for charity exhibitions or to future generations within the family. This decision helped calm much of the public outrage. Petitions that had once gathered thousands of signatures began to slow, and the headlines gradually shifted to other stories. On the surface, the storm had passed. Yet beneath the calm exterior, the undercurrents of tension within the royal family remained a silent reminder of the fragile balance that had been disrupted. However, for Princess Anne, this resolution brought little comfort. The image of Diana on her wedding day, bathed in the grandeur of St. Paul's Cathedral, the Spencer tiara sparkling atop her head, seamlessly blending with her radiant smile, was deeply etched in Anne's mind. She had fought fiercely to protect that image and the legacy it represented. Yet as the storm subsided and the tiara was safely secured, Anne's victory came at a personal cost. The rift that had formed between her and Camilla would not easily heal, leaving a silent divide that marked the outcome of her battle. Her trust in Camilla had been damaged in a way that no public display of politeness could ever repair. Anne's response was subtle but deliberate. She began to limit her presence at events attended by Camilla not out of overt defiance, but as a quiet withdrawal, a way to maintain peace while still holding on to her own principles. It was a small but powerful gesture, one that reflected the depth of the rift, even if it went unspoken. Anne understood that some wounds could never fully heal, and she chose to navigate the delicate balance between duty and personal integrity in her own way. She poured her energy into the causes she had long supported, dedicating herself to her equestrian commitments, charity work, and the steady rhythms of life at her country home. Those closest to her noticed the shift. There was a calmness in her tone, but also a distance, as though she had consciously drawn a protective circle around herself. Within the palace, life seemed to carry on as usual. State visits were meticulously planned, official photos were taken, and ceremonies unfolded with their customary solemnity. Yet those who understood the underlying currents could sense the change. The royal family may have appeared united on the surface, but beneath the fragile bonds of trust had been altered, and the reverberations were felt by those who were paying attention. Conversations were carefully worded, and seating arrangements at dinners and public events were subtly reconsidered with quiet attention. The royal family was no stranger to managing personality conflicts, but this rift felt different, more deeply ingrained. The Spencer tiara, once a symbol of unity and legacy, now became a silent reflection of the situation. Resting in its velvet-lined box deep in the palace vault, it was safe from harm, but separated from the life it once knew, its brilliance dimmed by the quiet tension surrounding it. Just like the family itself, it remained untouched, preserved, but forever altered. It would no longer catch the light at state banquets or be admired in display cases by the public. The Spencer tiara had become a relic cherished but untouchable, much like the relationships it had come to symbolize, preserved but irrevocably changed. The Queen, ever practical, regarded her role in the matter as complete. She had ensured the tiara's safety, made her necessary interventions, and now it was up to the family to find their way forward. The tiara, like the family, would remain, but the story of its legacy had shifted, as had the unspoken ties that had once bound them together. The Queen had acted to protect an important piece of history and to prevent the issue from becoming a long-term threat to the royal image. But even she understood that the wounds within the family would not fade as quickly as the newspaper headlines. Some wounds she knew could be managed, but they would never truly heal. For the public, the story soon became just another chapter in the long and often turbulent history of the royal family, a brief scandal that would eventually be overshadowed by new headlines. Yet for those involved, the lingering effects of the rift would quietly endure, carried by the silent tensions and the unspoken truths that remained beneath the surface. But for Anne, it marked a turning point she would never forget. She had stood her ground for what she believed in, fully aware that the price to be paid was not one that could be measured in money, but in the trust that had been fractured within the palace and in history itself. Even the brightest jewels, she understood, carry the heaviest shadows. The battle for the Spencer tiara may have officially ended, but its shadow still lingered in the corridors of the palace, casting a quiet pall over the family that would not easily fade. The cost of protecting a legacy was far greater than any treasure. It was the delicate balance of unity, respect, and trust that would forever be changed. What was once the crown of joy now rests in the shadows. The diamonds remain untouched, yet they carry a story forever altered. Princess Anne's determination ensured the preservation of a priceless piece of Diana's legacy, but in doing so, she also exposed the cracks in a family bound by duty, yet fractured by a loss of trust. In royal life, history is not only written in archives, it lives in enduring objects. These jewels are not mere adornments. They are vessels of memory, of power, of emotion, and in this case of a moment that forever changed the fabric of the royal family. They are witnesses holding secrets the public will never fully know. Perhaps that's why this moment is so significant. It's not just about a tiara. It's about loyalty, legacy, and the quiet battles fought far from the public eye. If this untold story has moved you, share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to uncover more royal truths hidden behind the glittering exterior of the crown. The real stories, after all, are often the ones never fully told.